Hello, and welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 23 of the Schmidt List. This week, I've got a great guest. You've probably heard of this guy. He's been around for quite a while. I was a big fan of the work he did with Hello Viking. Also a big fan of the work he did as creative director at BBDO. He's also been an instructor at MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I asked him to come on the show to talk about a Medium article that I had read that he had posted, which I will link to in the show notes, about old versus new and where great ideas come from. So without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation with Tim, and I'll talk to you after the show. Tim, thanks for joining me on the show today. I appreciate you coming out in the cold.
Yeah, it's almost done. My neighbor Leo was shoveling in his shorts the other day, so that's the official sign for me that winter in Minnesota, you're done.
He's your Puxatawny Phil, as it were.
He is. Yep.
Got it. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I've got a number of things I want to talk to you about. First off, though, can you tell me a bit about your background? How did you get started in the agency world, and what have you been up to as of late?
Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota, ended up getting a degree in jazz from the University of Cincinnati because that makes sense.
Because that's what you do.
Right. And then
it's a traditional thing people do.
Right. And then I moved back to Minneapolis, got started in the advertising business in 92. Fallon was very strong at that time. Carmichael was very strong. And just met a ton of people in the business. And then ended up putting a portfolio together as a copywriter. And then I moved to St. Louis because of some folks I had met here had moved there, and that was an agency job. So, and I kind of likened that St. Louis, that agency was about 140, 150 people, and it was kind of like advertising high school in the sense that we were churning a lot of retail accounts. We had a bank and a few other clients that were just high churn, high volume work. And so it was great as a writer because, hey, here's a briefing today. We need, to show clients headlines for a billboard tomorrow. And so you just really got your rigor, got your practice down. And at some point, about 94, the internet, was that when Al Gore invented the internet?
Yeah, I think that's when it's not a series, it's a series of tubes.
Yeah.
That's when the series of tubes were put together.
Right.
In the format.
And I, first learned about that and things like email and coding, and that was intriguing. And around the same time I moved to Boston to work for a small shop, and then we built a website because you can, and we coded up a thing. I remember my boss said, "Hey, what if we we'll call it the drunk tank," which was, what a wonderful idea.
Yeah, it's great.
But the idea was that you would write your thoughts about a subject, and we would put it on the agency website. I think that's called a blog, right? But we didn't know. This is 94, 95. Yeah. And so we had this repository of drunken recollections and perspectives.
Fun.
And then it just, I went freelancing, and then I wound up at a larger agency. The smaller agency was sort of like, I liken to the idea of a college out in the woods where, there are no grades and it's all Socratic, philosophical kind of learning,
Right. Lots of togas.
Right. And that was great. And then I wound up at an agency that was 800 people, which is sort of like, now you're going to NYU and you're in this
it's a machine.
Yeah. A giant lot of process and people, fast paced. But I wound up working on the VW business. 97, 98 is kind of when I started. And that's right when sort of the idea of corporate websites, they had VW.com. My boss and a guy in Auburn Hills that the client had built that first version of VW.com. And that was kind of handed over like, here, you and this art director, why don't you guys work on that? And I remember the first year of work that we're an agency, we're doing TV spots and billboards and print ads and things like that. But there was this side project called VW.com, and the agency wasn't making any money. We weren't billing for it because I don't think we knew to bill for it. But fortunately, on the client side, the woman who was responsible on the client side was like, I need a team. I need there to be a budget. I need this to be a real thing. So we worked together. We did this somewhere in, I think it was 98. We hosted a summit, if you will, for her leadership and the agency leadership to essentially say the internet's a real thing. The agency needs to be paid to work on VW.com.
Right.
The client side, Tessa needed staff. Essentially, like, hey, everybody, let's take this
as a legit
thing.
Yeah,
and so
it's
we went
a whole
from
new channel.
Yeah, and so we went from people essentially working nights and weekends, kind of on this thing, to all of a sudden there were, the agency. Arnold went. In the course of about a year, we hired like 100 people, not just for VW, but for other accounts. But we built out a user experience practice. Or in the day, it was information architecture.
Yes, right.
And are you a project manager or a producer? And what's the difference, right? But hiring all of these people, and are they writers or interactive writers? The labeling thing.
Yeah.
But that was up into 99 and 2000, and just massive, crazy expansion. Yeah. And it was fun to kind of be in the midst of all that because. I remember meeting with the chief ops lady at the 800 people. Like, how do we structure this? What titles do we need?
Right.
And entities like the 4As, they had they didn't know how to. There weren't job descriptions, and so we were all. This is Razorfish and like people smoking $100 bills and saying advertising is going to, So it was a lot of fun because you got to try structurally in terms of process and roles, and we built things. And then that agency, so we lost the VW business. That happens. And then I moved back to Minneapolis and ended up at Carmichael Lynch for a bit, working on things there. And then the opportunity came to start my own agency. So. With some partners, built Hello Viking, and then Hello Viking birthed Curation Station, which was a software company that curated social content, which is essentially what Percolate and all the other firms do now. We were doing then. We started an online banner ad production shop called Bannerpalooza because we had the network and people, so we were servicing agencies. And then Hello Viking was the agency that ran for about 6 years, and then we shut that down, and then I wound up at BBDO for a bit, which just said goodbye to those guys after a little after 4 years. So, and then I've in the interim, I was the president of the Minnesota Interactive Marketing Association for 4 years, and was on the board actually for about 6. And that was fun because you just get to meet a bunch of different people and get different perspectives on the Twin Cities and on all facets of. Marketing as a service, marketing as software. Marketing isn't necessarily just ad agencies or design firms. It's also software and customer service.
Sure.
And then I've been teaching at MCAD off and on for the last decade or so, mostly teaching a class called The Future of Advertising, which is predicated the article that you saw. It's really an exploration of saying, well, how do we define advertising agencies? How do we define advertising? And when you think, here we are in 2018, and the definition of an advertising agency is extremely diverse. Yeah. Facebook is by all rights an advertising agency. Accenture, a business consulting firm that's been around for, a long time. They are an advertising agency. BBDO is an advertising agency, but so is Twin Cities Business Magazine or Meredith with all of their titles. They are. So who isn't an advertising agency? Right. But recognizing that they all approach business problems, like I have a business problem, great. Here are marketing services that might help address that business problem. But recognize that the people delivering it, whether it's an independent agency or a networked agency or a platform or a business consulting group, they all approach the idea of advertising from slightly different perspectives. And that's what's really fascinating right now.
Yeah, no, it is. Well, to that point, I hear people saying the same thing, is every company is a software company these days too, right? Because you've got to have software to support the work that you're doing, whether it's your own custom stuff, custom hand-rolled thing, or you're piecing together tons of different frameworks to kind of make up one solid delivery unit.
Yeah. And also the idea of marketing what is marketing? From the older perspective, it was about messaging that was pushed at you.
Yeah.
Whether that was a TV spot or a print ad or a billboard. And now, sort of, again, post-internet, in a sort of post-digital software is everything world that we live in, marketing is proximity-based. It is instance-based. It is to some degree, personalized. But you could also argue that the way in which I'm processing a credit card transaction at your checkout is a form of marketing. Yeah. Or what does the receipt look like? Or what's the way that I engage with you? If I engage with your brand online through some sort of portal, what is that? That is a brand experience. So everything is brand experiences.
Yeah.
And therefore, you might be talking to a software company about how to improve conversion, in an e-commerce experience, but that also means you need to be talking about, well, how are we driving people into that e-commerce experience in the first place? So they're all interconnected.
Yeah, no, it's true. And like you said, I want to go back to what you were saying about kind of the old versus the new, which is one of the things why I wanted to talk with you today, because I read your Medium post called "Will It Blend? Will It End?" The idea here is kind of the old way that these ideas, like for me, it's where do ideas come from and where do the best ideas come from?
Yeah.
And in the old way, you kind of talk about there was this traditional art director and copywriter team combo that went into some room and magically came out and handed over everything and said, here is your solution.
Ta-da.
Ta-da. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ta-da. And we'll be back in 2 more days with another one for you. And that was just like the process. And now what you talk about in the new is that it's this much bigger collaborative effort. You're bringing the client in not for a presentation, but in for workshops, and you're grabbing the people that are working on the banner ads and the digital to the people that are working on the video to the social team. They're all coming in together to work on these ideas, right?
Yeah. Well, look what's happened to the music industry. Look what's happened to the film industry. The rise of empowering technology and the rise of software, all of that has had a traumatic impact on how ideas come into being. And if you think about the way in which movies used to be made, there was a lot of control held by the director and a lot of control held by the writer. And there's, obviously still is, but the truth is my 12-year-old can go make a movie now, and no one can say no. And he can put it. Well, he can't put it on YouTube because he's not allowed to put things on YouTube. But
he has access to distribution, though.
Right. Yeah. And so the marketplace is just disintermediated. It's radically different, and that is a threat philosophically to a way of approaching ideas. So you think about, what did it take to get into the advertising industry in the late 80s and the early 90s? You had to have a portfolio.
Right.
And it was difficult to make a portfolio. You ended up having to have access to color copiers, which were very expensive.
Right.
You had to have some degree of hand skills, and maybe even learning how to use programs like Quark Express or whatever.
Yeah.
And so there was it was not easy to become an art director or a writer in an advertising agency, unlike today. And again, not to say that I'm not to disparage anyone.
No,
it's just that the way that you access the system is different. And when you think about an individual empowered by technology who can create an idea and distribute it and generate an audience, they have as much validity as an advertising agency that's being paid lots of money to develop strategies and ideas and also put ideas out there to advocate for brands. That's a threat to people who hold a worldview of it's about exacting control.
Okay.
And it's